Welcome to my cinematography portfolio video. In this video we'll be going through multiple things with regards to this year's cinematography module. The things I'll be going through in this video are the camera shootout, in which I was the DOP for, an Antarctic weather station DOP exercise, my graduation film The Deals camera test, Snippet the Rose, a film in which I am camera operating on, that camera test, Snippet the Rose directing workshop, The Deals directing workshop, and The Deals final camera test. First off, the camera test, in which we compare the Sony f55, Canon C300 and the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. I had opted to DOP this camera shootout. Some of the things I had to abide by were practical lamps, light and dark areas, colour within the shot, and to be able to match both a mid shot and a wide shot. To light this, I chose to use a 500 watt China ball next to the subject, a 2.5K HMI through the left window, a 1.8K HMI through the skylight, and dados to light up the lamps. After this we moved to the exteriors, where we discovered a few things. Firstly, the Blackmagic would need infrared filters when outdoors. And secondly, we discovered that the highlights were held better by the Sony than the Blackmagic and the Canon. That's due to the dynamic range on the Sony being higher than the other two. Now we move on to a task in which I chose to DOP on. This was to show the passing of time in an Antarctic weather station. The main idea of the task though was to create 5 shots within a 2-hour time period, which meant I had to organise my crew as well as my shots and lighting plans in order to achieve this. We were also allowed to bring in directors for this task. I chose to bring in Natasha Mattox, as I worked with her last year and I'll also be working with her this year on my graduation film, The Deal. Luckily I had managed to get most of the crew I'll be working with this year, which was a great practice session for them and me and just us working together as a whole. So in order to light this, I chose to go for a 2.5 HMI through the back right window. That was to recreate the moon. I then went for a Kino above to act as a fluorescent ceiling light. On top of that there was also a 1.8 HMI through the left window, and that was going through a sill because if there was snow filled up to the sides so he couldn't get out and was trapped in this Antarctic weather station. As you can see here, he moves over to see if the phone's working, but everything's gone out power wise. Another thing we had to show was the time passing from night to day. So the way I did that was to change the colour of the gels. As you can see here, he's obviously in a tense moment and he's realised he's not getting out and nothing's going to happen and he could potentially die there. He eventually falls asleep. This is how I showed the passing of time and the transition of night to morning. I just did that by switching out a gel from a blue gel I think to an orangey gel. We chose to go with handheld in this scene, myself and Natasha, because we thought it brought some sense of reality to the struggles he was going through and that he might be stuck there forever. One of the major problems I came across was the time everything took. In order to complete the 5 shots it took longer than expected, but that was mainly due to the setups and the light setups and not everything flowing as good as it could have done. But I guess this is good to come up against now, as it means I'm going to prepare more for the shoot and hopefully it'll flow better when it comes down to it. In this camera test, the main thing was to get the crew working together. Another thing we wanted to assess was trying to recreate a TV light. I had asked my camera team to set up both one of the Sony F-series cameras and the Canon C300. This is because I was going to do a side-by-side comparison. As you can see, I have my grip setting up the tracks. This is because I wanted to do a dolly in on the subject. We chose to use the GF Quad dolly because it was available and more convenient with one grip on hand. As you can see here, my gaffer and my spark are setting up a China ball. This was done as we wanted to put the light in there next to a practical lamp. As you can see here, I was just having a small meeting with my gaffer and my 2 sparks. I was trying to explain to them the method that we were going to try in order to recreate this TV light. We were going to be using black flags to drop in and out in front of the lights. This was done to show the change in light as in a flicker like a TV, and also the different colours of gels, so we could go from blue to green, green to blue. Here I was just asking my spark if he could rearrange the wires in a safer manner. After trying out the black flag method for the TV light, it wasn't working so well, and due to the time frame we decided to try a different method, which was using the dimmers. We just dimmed it up and down on the 3 different colours, which in effect I think it kind of worked quite well, because as you'll see in the footage to come, the light does increase and decrease like a TV and the different colours work. However, the major problem we came across was the shadow, and the fact that the shadows on the walls weren't switching from left to right quick enough. In effect, that was then giving us a double shadow. The scene in the film that has the TV in it is set in the council flat. In this council flat there is also a snake tank emitting a green light, and the way in which I tried to recreate that green light was from a dado placed high above on the wall onto the back of the actors. However, this didn't quite work out too well as the dado was too high up. So for the future, to get around this problem, we're going to actually use a green practical light within the snake tank that will emit enough light to light the characters. Here is the footage from the Sony f55. For me it's a little bit too dark, however that's just in the right corner, and in the actual shoot that's going to be lit up by the green snake tank. As you can see here, the flashing TV light kind of works. The only problem is this double shadow in the background. Like mentioned before, the light couldn't move across quick enough in order to eliminate that shadow. As this was a camera test, I wanted my camera operator and first AC to have a bit of a challenge and not just be sat there. So in order to do that, I incorporated a track in, followed by a camera movement up to the left as you just seen. The character then walks across the room and then back into a seat. This was just to see how my first AC did, and also the framing that Ryan did on the camera. Now moving on to the Canon C300. This is the actual camera we're going to use on the shoot. Personally, I prefer this camera due to the grittiness it kind of gives off. There's a little bit more grain which gives it more of a filmic look, and also for us that's going to work in perfectly as our whole script is based around the grunginess and grittiness of life in the council estate. Another reason we have chosen to go with the Canon is due to the sharpness of the actual final image. With the Sony mixed in with the CP primes, it's way too sharp for what we want to kind of give off. I also find it more practical to go with a camera that gives a better look to how we want the final film to be, as opposed to say using the Sony with the CP primes and then having to put filters in front of it in order to soften it up a little. Coming out of the camera test, I now know which camera I want to use, along with a sense of how to light for this TV. Moving on to the Snip of the Rose camera test. On this shoot, I'm the camera operator. As you can see here, I'm just with the DOP, George, and my first AC, Josh, as well as Abby, the second AC. We're just setting up the camera in order to how George wanted it. If I remember correctly, he had asked me to put on the 2-3-5-1 bars. After this was done and the camera was all set up, I now had time to think about the actual shots that were going to be happening. George had ran me through the shots we were going to be doing on that day. As you can see here, we're going to start with a dolly across the characters that are sat in the chairs. From here we then move into a mixture of shots. We're going to be doing a medium close-up to a mid shot, which is a dolly out, a high angle wide shot on the sticks, an over the shoulder shot on the sticks, and a medium close-up shot on the sticks. As you can see here, I was working with the grip in order to set up the camera and the positioning how George wanted it. Okay, here is the actual footage from the test that we did. This is the tracking across shot, which I think played out quite well in terms of the tracking. As the camera was locked off, this was mainly down to the grip. Personally, I think he did a great job in terms of his speed. After this, we went on to the track in which I was to pan up and keep minimal headroom. Moving on from this, we went on to the Snip at the Rose directing workshop. Throughout this directing workshop, there were multiple shots in which I had to do. As you can see here, this is a tracking back where I had to pan down, mainly keeping the headroom the same on Blanche, the character at the window. Moving into the second shot, which is on sticks, I had to focus around the second character that's about to blow out the candles. One of the challenges I came across was keeping the headroom on her, because as you'll see here, she walks back and sits down next to Blanche, but when she does that she goes out of frame. However, I had to adjust the headroom for when she comes and sits down so that it kind of works perfectly in terms of how George wanted it. You'll see what I mean when it cuts back to this next shot. Here, this is when she came and sat down. I had to adjust the headroom for this. Throughout the duration of this directing workshop, it wasn't too challenging in a sense of camera movement. The main thing I just had to watch for throughout the whole of the director's workshop was keeping my headroom on the characters. The way I did this was to not have the tripod locked off. I also changed the settings on the tripod so it was very resistant, and that meant I could kind of play around just slowly moving it up and down, left and right, in order to keep my characters perfectly in frame. Throughout this directing workshop, George reassured me on the camera operating and that he was happy with it. This was good because it made me kind of relax into the role a bit more instead of worrying about if he likes it or if he doesn't and whatnot. Next we'll be moving on to the directing workshop in which I was the DOP for. This was a tense scene in Tommy's flat where Shell, the other character, comes to basically steal Tommy's phone and just suss out what he's all about. However, she does this by using her sexiness and her power as a woman. The way in which I wanted to light this scene was, in a sense, a grim tone. This was because this is to show the dirtiness and the grottiness of this drug dealer, Tommy. The way in which I did this was to use a series of lights. I put a 300 directly overhead Tommy's coffee table, and that was on a dimmer so I could completely control it. The rest of the lights were then Philips Hue bulbs. For example, as you can see here, that was a Philips Hue bulb put to green in a little glass diffusion. The thing with the Philips Hue bulbs is that they can all be controlled and dimmed and the colour changing all from a single phone app. The reason I decided to use these was mainly because I wanted to try them out and if they would work for the actual shoot. So in a sense it's more of a test method. The other lights that were used in this scene was some more Philips Hue bulbs put into a standing practical light. You'll see that when the shot changes. I also used a Philips Hue bulb in another glass diffusion to try out as the TV light. I did that because I wanted to test this out as the last TV light didn't quite work how I wanted it to work. However, after testing and looking back at the footage, this Philips Hue bulb just had no impact on the scene. Another light that I used was a 2K from behind the set. This was pointed up bouncing into a 4x4 polyboard, and that was just so I could control the overall brightness in the shot. In terms of the camera movement for the scene, we decided to try out something slightly different. We took a two-shot approach on the whole scene playing through. We decided to go handheld and in a sense choreograph the camera movement with the action happening in the scene. The way we did this was by starting off from Shell's perspective. We would follow the whole scene with Shell hitting all the major points and focal points that we wanted to hit. Especially for Natasha's directing workshop, we wanted to hit the main points for her. We would then move on to Tommy's perspective and do the full scene again from his point of view in a sense, hitting all the major points on Shell. However, we discovered for this actual scene the method of going for two really long handheld shots and hitting the points around the different parts within the scene. It just didn't work out too well in how we imagined it, so for the actual film we'll be cutting it up and doing it in a different way. Moving on to our final camera test that was allocated, we wanted to test a few different things. The previous day we'd been on a location scout to both the church we wanted to use and also the council flats. So for this actual test we wanted to try out, like mentioned, a couple different things. First off was the lighting within the community room. The way we wanted to do this was, in a sense, we wanted to light the subject sat down. However, we wanted to figure out how to create a light so that when they stood up they would dip out of the light into shadow and then back into light again. The way I discovered to do this was by using a side light and a top light. The side light would light the subject while sat down, however in a sense barned off so that it couldn't light the subject when he stood up or she stood up. I would then use a top light above to cast shadow over the face of the character. I also wanted to test out a colour palette. We decided to go with yellow for this shot because in the community room this is the colour we'll be wanting to go with. Moving on from this, we wanted to test out some lighting that we're going to have in the church. As the church is really big and we're going to be doing it at night, the way I'm going to do it is pushing HMIs through the windows. However, due to it being night, we're going to replicate moonlight. So I think the way we're going to do it is to have the subjects backlit by the moonlight within the church, in a sense creating a silhouette throughout the scene. We also want to keep this pretty blue, so I've graded some test footage to show you. And finally in this test we wanted to test out some double vision stuff. In the film at the end in the church scene, Tommy is basically kidnapped by the women and then he's drugged. So what we wanted to try out was how we're going to show the characters whilst he's in his drugged phase. So I got Ryan, the camera operator, to sit there, in a sense giving some drunken movements. So now this footage will be given over to our editor Jamie, who's going to try recreate a double vision effect in post. Here are the 3 different test pieces of footage. I have graded up this footage as to how we want it to look within the film. Thank you for watching this video. Please refer to the cinematography portfolio for a more in-depth analysis on everything that's been touched on here.